Have you ever stopped to wonder why some ancient civilizations just vanished without a trace? Historians offer a myriad of explanations: wars, plagues, natural disasters. But what if I told you there was another, far more scandalous reason, one that historians rarely discuss openly? Today, we're going to dive deep into ancient texts and uncover 3 sexual sins that many believe led to divine judgment and the destruction of entire nations. You might be shocked by how relevant these ancient accounts still are, even today. Get ready. This won't be an easy journey, but it promises to be incredibly fascinating. Before we unravel these stories, let's set the stage a bit. When we talk about divine judgment and the downfall of civilizations, we're, of course, referring to ancient biblical and extra-biblical accounts. These aren't just rule books. They're chronicles detailing the relationship between humanity and a higher power, a power that, according to these texts, laid down specific moral codes. It was the violation of these norms, particularly concerning sexuality, that frequently led to dramatic consequences for entire cities and even nations. Consider some of the most infamous catastrophes of antiquity. These weren't necessarily random occurrences. They could have been a direct response to specific human actions. All right, let's dive into the first item on our list, a concept that has truly become a household name. You've probably all heard the expression Sodom and Gomorrah, or the sin of Sodom. But what's the real story behind these words? We're talking about events described in the book of Genesis, where 2 once thriving cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, were literally wiped off the face of the earth by fire and brimstone. Picture this scene. According to the biblical account, these cities were so steeped in depravity that the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah reached heaven itself. God decides to investigate and sends 2 angels, disguised as ordinary travellers. Righteous Lot, Abraham's nephew who lived in Sodom, meets them and invites them into his home, seeking to protect them from the dangers of the city at night. This is where the true horror begins. No sooner had the angels entered the house than a mob surrounded it. This wasn't just a band of ruffians. The Bible explicitly states, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. In other words, the entire male population of Sodom had come to Lot's house, and their demand was horrifying and unambiguous. They shouted to Lot, "Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." The ancient Hebrew verb to know in this context signifies only one thing: to engage in sexual intercourse. The mob was demanding that Lot surrender his guests for group sexual assault. Today, some try to soften this story, claiming that Sodom's primary sin was inhospitality. But let's be honest, the text describes something entirely different. Their level of depravity was such that they were ready to forcibly seize strangers, guests who were under the sacred protection of their host's home. A desperate Lot steps out to the crowd and offers them the unthinkable. His 2 virgin daughters saying, "Do to them whatever you wish, but do nothing to these men." This horrific act by Lot only underscores the monstrous intentions of the mob. But they didn't want women. They specifically wanted the men. They began to break down the door, threatening Lot with even greater violence. It was at this moment that the angel struck the attackers with blindness and rescued Lot and his family, commanding them to flee the city immediately. And then fire rained down upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Complete and utter destruction. So the primary sin here wasn't merely homosexual acts, as many might simplistically believe. It was aggressive, violent, predatory sexual behaviour, elevated to the norm for an entire society. It was a complete absence of moral boundaries, where lust became the only law, and violence the means to its gratification. This is the true sin of Sodom, for which, according to Scripture, such terrible retribution came. Let's move on now to the second sexual sin, one that's perhaps even more insidious because it cleverly disguised itself as piety and religion. This involves cultic prostitution and sexual rituals that were rampant among the ancient Canaanite tribes, the very people inhabiting the land the Israelites, according to the Bible, were destined to enter. To truly grasp the depth of this phenomenon, let's briefly delve into their worldview. The Canaanites worshipped fertility gods like Baal and Ashtoreth. Their logic was simple. For the land to yield crops, for livestock to multiply, and for families to have children, they believed they had to assist the gods, to show them what was desired. The best way, they thought, was to imitate the act of creation. This meant ritual sex. Imagine a temple, a place we typically associate with prayer, silence and holiness. Now picture that temple as essentially a legalized ritual brothel. Serving within were the Kedoshim and Kedoshoth, male and female cult prostitutes. People came to the temple not only to offer sacrifices but also to engage in sexual relations with these individuals. This was not considered a sin. Rather, it was an act of worship, an integral part of their religious ritual. The money paid for these acts went directly into the temple treasury. The Bible describes these practices with utter revulsion. The books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy contain the strictest prohibitions against them. God explicitly commanded the Israelites, "You must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you." Why was God's reaction so severe? First, it utterly distorted the very idea of God and worship. The sacred became intertwined with the profane, the spiritual with the most base carnal desires. Sexuality, understood biblically as a sacred gift for marriage, was perverted into a commodity and a public spectacle. Second, it shattered the institution of the family. When ritualistic infidelity became the norm, even encouraged by religion, the concept of marital fidelity simply vanished. This eroded the entire moral fabric of society. And finally, it was inextricably linked to other abominable practices, including human sacrifice, particularly child sacrifice, also prevalent in Baal worship. In essence, sexual depravity was just the tip of an iceberg of total moral decomposition. It was for these reasons the Bible asserts that the land vomited out its inhabitants. Their destruction was not depicted as an act of unprovoked aggression, but rather as a surgical operation to remove a deadly cancerous tumour that threatened to infect everything around it. And finally, we come to the third sin. While not as outwardly dramatic or shocking as the burning of Sodom or the temple orgies, it is arguably the most insidious, for it quietly gnaws at the fabric of any society from within. This refers to rampant sexual promiscuity and adultery, which ceases to be merely a private vice and morphs into an accepted societal norm. Unlike the first 2 points, this isn't about a singular event or ritual. Instead, it's a systemic, pervasive erosion of the foundational principles that hold society together: family and faithfulness. Biblical prophets like Jeremiah, Hosea, and Ezekiel consistently admonished the Israelite and Judean peoples for precisely this sin. Their writings are replete with metaphors comparing unfaithfulness to God with marital infidelity, often portraying the nation itself as a wayward wife or a harlot. Why? For ancient authors, the connection was undeniable. A society that loses its grasp on marital fidelity inevitably forfeits its capacity for faithfulness in other areas, in covenants, in friendships, and in its devotion to God. Imagine a society described by the prophet Jeremiah. He paints a picture with words like, "They swear falsely, commit adultery, and throng to houses of prostitutes. Each one whinnies after his neighbour's wife." This is a depiction of utter moral anarchy, where marriage is a mere pretense, fidelity an empty promise, and extramarital affairs are common entertainment, not even bothering to be discreet. Today, many might dismiss this with, "So what? That's a private matter, a personal choice." But the Bible views it through a different lens. It sees not just a personal choice, but a symptom of a terminal illness afflicting the entire social body. When the family, the fundamental unit of society, disintegrates, everything else begins to unravel. Children raised in such environments lack a model for healthy relationships. They fail to learn responsibility and faithfulness. This breeds a chain reaction of lawlessness, selfishness, and distrust. When no one trusts anyone, and everyone pursues only their own pleasure, such a society becomes incapable of self-organization, defense, or genuine development. It becomes weak and vulnerable. The prophets directly link this moral decay to impending catastrophes. the conquest by the Assyrians and Babylonians, the destruction of the temple, and subsequent exile. They asserted that external enemies were merely instruments in God's hands, and the true root cause of their downfall was internal decay. A people mired in debauchery and betrayal simply couldn't withstand external threats. It rotted from within, collapsing under its own moral weight. Thus, adultery, when it becomes the norm, acts as a silent killer of civilizations, slow but inexorable in its destructive march. What makes these ancient stories so shocking and, crucially, so instructive for us today? Firstly, it's the sheer scale of the consequences. We're not talking about the punishment of individuals here. We're talking about the complete erasure of entire cities and cultures from the face of the earth. This alone demonstrates just how seriously these transgressions were viewed. Secondly, there's their surprising relevance. If you look closely, many of these ancient problems, the breakdown of family units, rampant sexual promiscuity, the pursuit of pleasure at all costs, bear an astonishing resemblance to the challenges we face in our modern world. And here's the fascinating revelation. These stories, penned thousands of years ago, aren't just recounting the past. They serve as a powerful warning about how easily a society can undermine itself from within if it neglects fundamental moral principles. Perhaps God's destruction isn't a literal act but a metaphor for self-destruction when moral decay reaches a critical tipping point. Think about it. When moral foundations crumble, social, economic, and ultimately physical collapse often follow. So we've seen how, according to ancient texts, terrifying consequences befell entire nations due to sexual transgressions. Whether it was the sin of Sodom, cultic prostitution, or general debauchery, they all point to one crucial lesson. Violating certain moral boundaries has far-reaching consequences. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I hope it has given you something profound to think about. If you enjoyed this fascinating dive into history and morality, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next uploads. What are your thoughts on these ancient lessons? Do you believe that similar transgressions could lead to societal collapse even in our time? Share your thoughts in the comments below.